For those of you who are wondering why Zakir Naik has never once agreed to face an experienced Christian debater, even though we've all been challenging him for years, let me show you what would happen if Naik ever stopped running long enough to step on stage with an actual Christian debater. Naik's favorite argument is the sign of Jonah argument he mindlessly copied from Ahmed Deedat.
And that book of Jonah is 1 page.
Book of Jonah less than 2 pages.
When they threw Jonah overboard, was he dead or was he alive?
When Jonah was thrown overboard, was he dead or alive?
The storm subsides and a fish comes and gobbles him up.
A fish comes and gobbles him up.
Dead or alive?
When the fish swallows him up, was Jonah dead or alive?
On the third day, the fish vomits him on the seashore. Dead or alive?
The fish vomits him out. Jonah comes onto the shore. Was he dead or alive?
If he died, no miracle.
If he dies, no miracle.
Alive, 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 alive.
Alive, 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 alive.
So it's a miracle of a miracle of a miracle.
Miracle of a miracle of a miracle of a miracle.
Now, Jesus' point is obvious to anyone who isn't desperately trying to reinterpret the Bible to make it line up with Islam. If you get swallowed by a giant fish in the middle of the sea, you're not coming out. If you do, it's a miracle. Similarly, if you die, if you get swallowed by Sheol, the abode of the dead, you're not coming out. If you do, it's a miracle. So Jonah escaping the fish was a miracle. Jesus escaping Sheol was a miracle. Pretty straightforward. But Muslim apologists love to twist Jesus' words to support their religion, so they insist that the only possible meaning here is that Jesus wouldn't die. Jonah was alive in the fish, so Jesus was alive in the tomb. Now, what's wrong with the interpretation of Naik and Deedat? Lots of things, but one of the most glaring problems is that Jesus calls their interpretation satanic. I'm willing to lay this down as a rule. If someone says something, and there are two different ways to interpret what he says, but he specifically calls one of the interpretations satanic, the interpretation he calls satanic is certainly not the correct interpretation. Jesus mentions the sign of Jonah twice in the book of Matthew. He refers to the sign of Jonah in Matthew 12 and again in Matthew 16. Naik and Deedat always quote the passage in Matthew 12. Why don't they talk about what Jesus says in Matthew 16? Let's find out. Matthew 16, verses 1 through 4. The Pharisees and Sadducees came up, and testing Jesus, they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. But he replied to them, "When it is evening, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, there will be a storm today, for the sky is red and threatening. Do you know how to discern the appearance of the sky, but cannot discern the signs of the times? An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and a sign will not be given it, except the sign of Jonah." And he left them and went away. So the sign that Jesus would give them is the sign of Jonah. What is the sign of Jonah according to Zakir Naik and Ahmed Deedat? Muslim apologists want us to believe that Jesus was telling the Pharisees and the Sadducees that he would survive crucifixion, be placed in the tomb alive, and then come out of the tomb alive. Let's read some more. Same chapter, verses 13 through 17. Now, when Jesus came to the district of Caesarea Philippi, he was asking his disciples, "Who do the people say that the Son of Man is?" Jesus' favorite title for himself was the Son of Man. And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, and others Elijah, but still others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." Notice Jesus asks his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter answers, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." If Jesus were a Muslim prophet, this would have been a really good time to say, "Whoa, what's wrong with you, Peter? Why did you just call me the Son of the living God? Don't you know that God can't have a son because he has no wife?" But that's not what Jesus said. He said that Peter was blessed and that Jesus' true identity as the divine Son was revealed to Peter by the Father. Is that what Islam teaches? No. So why does Zakir Naik go to this book and pretend that it supports Islam? Because he's a liar. But he doesn't want his followers to know that he's a liar, which is why he only agrees to face people who've never debated before. And it's about to get worse. Same chapter, verses 21 through 23. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed. Yes, Jesus just said that he's going to Jerusalem and that he's going to be killed and be raised up on the third day. Now, watch what Peter does. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "God forbid it, Lord. This shall never happen to you." Peter here says exactly what a Muslim would say. "No, Jesus, you don't know what you're talking about. You're not going to die." And how does Jesus answer him? But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are not setting your mind on God's interests, but man's." Why does Jesus call Peter, his most trusted disciple, Satan? He calls Peter Satan for saying that Jesus wasn't going up to Jerusalem to die. Now, Jesus clearly isn't saying that Peter is literally Satan. He wouldn't want Satan as the leader of the apostles. And he's not saying that Peter is possessed by Satan. I don't think Satan knew how God was going to use the crucifixion, so it wouldn't make sense for Satan to oppose Jesus' crucifixion. Jesus is rebuking Peter for opposing the gospel. Peter called Jesus the Son of the living God. So Peter got that part right. And Jesus said that that was revealed to him by the Father. But when Jesus tells Peter that he's going to die on the cross and rise from the dead, absolutely essential for our salvation, Peter says, "No." And Jesus replies, "Peter, you don't know whom you're serving right now." By focusing on worldly things and not paying attention to what the Father is doing through me, you're opposing the gospel. And he calls Peter Satan. Think about this. When you acknowledge that Jesus is the divine Son of the Father, Jesus says that you're blessed and that this was revealed to you by the Father. But when you say, "Jesus never died on the cross," Jesus calls you Satan. Which one of those categories is Zakir Naik in? Which one of those categories is Ahmed Deedat in? Are they in the category of people who acknowledge that Jesus is the divine Son of God? Or are they in the category of people who oppose Jesus' death on the cross? They're in the category of people who oppose Jesus' death on the cross. And what does Jesus call them? What was the name he gave for people like that? Wasn't it Satan? Now, doesn't Zuckernick know what Jesus said in Matthew 16? Doesn't he know that Jesus clearly said that he was going to Jerusalem to die? Doesn't he know that Jesus called the Muslim apologists' interpretation of the sign of Jonah satanic? Of course he does. And yet he stands in front of crowds of gullible people who've never read the Gospel of Matthew, and he convinces them that what Jesus really said in the Gospel of Matthew was that he would never die on the cross. What kind of person spends his entire life lying to people about Jesus? When a person spends his entire life deceiving people, is he serving God or is he serving Satan? My Muslim friends, Jesus said that recognizing him as the Son of God, that comes from the Father. Opposing his death and resurrection, that comes from Satan. So if your religion is dedicated to denying what comes from the Father and supporting and upholding what comes from Satan, what would Jesus call your religion? What would he call your prophet? And if you, now that you've seen what Jesus actually said, if you continue to deny that Jesus is the divine Son of God, if you continue to deny his death and resurrection, if you continue to support apologists who spend all their time deceiving people about Jesus, what would Jesus call you? Let me know in the comment section.